and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 17 was the clash of the contenders and the battlers. The top 9 sides faced off against the bottom 9, and there was only one game where the lower ranked side triumphed, with the Swans holding off the Dockers in a close one on Sunday. This week on Finders Keepers, it's probably going to be a bit of a shorter episode. I've taken some time away from my family holiday to just put this together for you, just to give you my thoughts on round 17. So I won't do any questions at the end. I will do my top 5 waiver picks as usual. And yeah, let's jump into it, shall we? I didn't watch a lot of the footy this weekend. I was able to watch Thursday, Friday night games quite closely, and was fortunate that enough of my family activities were able to pause just as the Adelaide-Melbourne game started. So I was able to watch my Crows just do enough to beat the D's. So let's go through what I noticed in round 17, starting on Thursday night. North Melbourne versus the Bulldogs. Pretty entertaining game, very high scoring. I thought North showed plenty, but the Dogs just too good and certainly kicked away at the end. For North, it was pretty good to see Bailey Scott return to the senior side and not wear a vest. He's been in and out this year, which has surprised me, if I'm honest. I thought the last couple of years he'd shown plenty. So good to see him. He was on his usual spot on the wing. I think from a fantasy point of view, we want to see him more in a half-back type role. But at the very least, he's playing, and I reckon he did enough to hold his spot. Colby McKercher, this was his first big score since returning to that friendly role we fell in love with that he had last season in his first year. Put up a 124 this week, and I think things are just starting to look all set for him in the fantasy space. He's found that spot at halfback, and his scoring is, well, it's been delicious the last 4 or 5 weeks, hasn't it? Cooper Harvey, the son of a gun. There's nothing like seeing a player you remember very well and seeing their son play to make you feel old. And then when I looked and saw Cooper Harvey, he's actually been around for a few years, so it's not like he's just arrived. Not sure what's kept him out of the side the last couple of years. I think it's been mostly injury problems. He looked really good, I thought. His first game in a long time. Kicked a really cool goal. Scored 62. I thought he did plenty, so he should keep his spot. Someone I am worried about is Jai Simpkin. His drop-off in the last month and a bit is pretty concerning. I thought he caught a bit of a break when Davies Uniacke went off with the concussion. And what I mean by that is we saw Simpkin move into the centre bouncers. He's really a half-forward flanker that pushes up and gets a little bit of inside game. But on the weekend, he was, after LDU went off, he was their number 1 centre bouncer, 10D. Just can't find the footy, Simpkin. Just cannot get his hands on it. It's a bit of a worry. Should have forward status next year, though, for owners that are starting to get sick of him. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. For the Doggies, Aaron Norton, I thought was pretty impressive. Backed up his big score last week with a flat 100, thanks to 5 goals. And actually, I didn't look into this. I should have. But I don't imagine there's been too many times Norton has put together back-to-back tons. I reckon that could even be a first for him. So that's great signs. Bailey Dale scored 59, and he was getting tagged in the first quarter, so they moved him to the forward line. I think it was Constanti who was tagging him. So he went to the forward line after quarter time, and he started as a forward. Before he had this great fantasy role, he was a forward. So, yeah, I just found it strange. And Bevo acknowledged the fantasy world after the game, saying, I think he said super coaches, but he said we wouldn't be happy with him. And no, we're not, Bevo. Bailey Dale owners would not be happy. But I reckon we see him return to his usual spot and usual scoring this week. And lastly, Cooper Hines. This is the most I've seen from him in a game, and I really liked it. I liked what I saw. I think a highish draft pick last year. has played plenty of games for the Dogs, in the sub-vest. But, yeah, I saw him all over the place Thursday night, and he looked like he was made for the big stage. So hopefully he keeps his spot. We get to see a little bit more of him as the weeks roll on. Friday night we had the double header, Carlton-Collingwood, to kick us off. And for the most part, it was a cracking game. But unfortunately for Blues fans, it's become quite a common theme for their season, is they did fall away and Collingwood got the big win in the end. For Carlton, I was really excited. Lachie Cowan was back and scored 89 in a really impressive return to the seniors. He looks the part. I mean, I've talked about him a bit this year, and he's gone back to the twos. He's been injured. I think Carlton are crying out for someone to just take that spot. Obviously Doherty's not the long-term answer in that role, and I think Cowan is. So hopefully Blues just persevere with him now. Ashton Moir, he put up a 49 in his fourth career game, but it was the first without a vest. Had some centre bounces, and I thought he looked pretty good. I didn't know who he was. I knew the name. I had no idea who he was, but the fact that they were putting him at centre bounces was really interesting, and I think he showed a bit. There's something there for Carlton. On to the rucks. So they went with the double ruck setup with Pitnet in the side, and De Koning really suffered. So Pitnet scored 93, De Koning 48. But I want to look at the ruck split to see who was the number one, and Pitnet was easily the number one. At centre bounces, the split was 61-39%, and around the ground ruck contests were 67-33% in favour of Pitnet. Bit of an interesting watch, De Koning, but geez, I don't think... I reckon if you're an owner, you could be getting a little frustrated, but I still believe what we saw at the start of the season. This is a guy that could be the number one ruck in the game. And I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know why Pitnet's in the side. There's a lot of noise about his contract and the offer from St Kilda. So I reckon you just sit tight, owners. I think he'll come good. He's just having a real quiet spell. For Collingwood, well, there wasn't this a sight for the fantasy world. Tom Mitchell, Titch, the pig returned. And I was very sure, well, not sure, but I really thought he would get the vest to start, or at least be a vest risk and not see out the whole game. But he played the full game, and he was part of a very tight centre bounce group of four with Pendles, Long and Dacos. Scored 88, got plenty of the ball, looked good. He kind of looked a bit, I don't know, he looked like he was moving better than I can remember the last couple of years anyway. So I think he has come back in at the right time for Collingwood, and he can push, a nice 8-10 week stretch to, hopefully push them and him to another premiership. Roan Steele debuted, 69 he scored as a mid-season draftee. Came in to cover the other Steele, side bottom, who was rested. And yeah, he played on a wing. I thought he looked really good. A pretty cool story for him to think, not only a few months ago was he not on an AFL list, now he's playing for the premiership favourites, actually got a game on a Friday night against Carlton and performed really well. Just the stuff of dreams, you would have thought. The other game in the doubleheader on Friday night was West Coast GWS, and Liam Duggan there's a decent resurgence from him. He may have not washed, but he wasn't looking good early days of this season. And at 28 and with the, where the club's headed, I did wonder if his fantasy days were maybe dwindling. But he's been great. 4 of his last 5 have been 90 plus. Put up a nice 116 on the weekend, taking plenty of kick-ins, playing that nice halfback role. Good signs for him. Ryan Marrick scored another decent 74. Still playing on the wing, but he was taking kick-ins again. So, yeah, I don't know. He's had a good couple of weeks, I reckon, Marrick. 74 is not huge, but it's better than what he was doing initially when he went back to the wing. Xavier O'Halloran, 107 he put up. Career-high 27 touches and his first fantasy ton. I just think we need to watch him and his role, because he's now in his 6th season. He's had a pretty decent rotation through the centre bounces all year, but we haven't seen much in the way of scoring. I feel like he's been more of a defensive sort of mid. But there's no reason why he can't now start to expand his game and put up fieldable scores. And with that forward status, he's a super handy player to have. Just got to see him not dropping those 40s and 50s on us anymore. Ryan Angwin, I was pretty happy with what I saw from him last week, and he backed it up, a 90. He was playing wing, but, looking at his heat map, he was all over the ground. And he scored 90 too. It was a great score. I just wondered, because he seemed to improve when Whitfield went off last week before the bye. And, Whitfield missed this week. And he just looks great. I really like the look of him. We'll see what happens when Whitfield returns. And then the other guy, Joe Fonte, 62, but a much better game from him. I love how he plays, and I just can see him being not the next Lockie Ash, because Lockie Ash is the next Lockie Ash. But geez, just a world where Whitfield's no longer there. Ash and Fonte, I reckon, could be pretty handy guys in the fantasy world. On to Saturday, Essendon and Gold Coast, and Zach Merritt. Oh, wow. Back onto the ball, bulk CBAs again for him, and 40 touches and a 145, if you don't mind. So we know this is what Zach Merritt can do. It's just been a pretty frustrating period for owners of Merritt, as the coaches sort of tried him at half back, moved him at forward at times, but he was scintillating. And with the news of Jai Caldwell's injury, it should mean that Merritt stays put in that midfield now, which is only going to mean a good chance that he finishes the year very hot. Jordan Ridley returned from yet another injury layoff. I thought it looked pretty solid, playing his customary halfback distributor role, scored 76. Took kick-ins. I mean, we know what we can get from Ridley, and that's a pretty fine scorer. But the injuries are just what have held him back. So fingers crossed he can stay on the park. For the Suns, Joel Jeffrey put up 132. That's his fourth ton of the season, and this one was a big one thanks to 10 marks. And I've talked about him before this year. He's just the guy at the Suns at halfback. I mean, Noble's there. We know Rioli's in and out, in terms of scoring. But Jeffrey, he's the one that can really put up the big scores. And I think it would have been a very nice pickup for those that grabbed him at the start of this season. Matty Rao, just a quick one on him, deserves a shout out. That's 6 tons in a row, which is, fantastic for owners who've waited for a few years for this. I think a lot of those tons are low tons, if I was being super picky, but 6 tons in a row is incredible. The only thing is, he's averaging 12 and a half tackles in that 6-week period, and he had 17 on the weekend. Now, I'm not saying he can't maintain a huge tackling record, but 12 and a half is huge. So if he needs to average over 12 tackles to average over 100, it's not ideal. And Ned Moyle got called up to cover Jared Witts, who was given the week off. And Moyle did what he always does when he comes in for Witts. Plays well, scores well. He scored 90 playing against Goldstein. And, my thoughts on him haven't changed. He could be one of the best rucks once Jared Witts retires. So when that day happens, make sure you've got him. Obviously, if you've got Witts and you've got Moyle as the handcuff, you're set for a very long time. Saturday twilight saw Geelong and Richmond down in Geelong. And, Richmond, I think, had a crack early, but, geez, they lost some soldiers early in that game. And Geelong, beat up on them as we would expect. Jack Bowes came in for Bailey Smith, who was a late withdrawal, as I'm sure every person in the fantasy world knows. But Bowes, you know, I'm just confused by him. I'm confused by how Geelong have used him. I can't work out if he's going to be a good fantasy player or not. And, you know, maybe if I'm still wondering that at this point, maybe he's just not. He scored 75, looked to be playing like on a wing, kicked a couple of goals. Don't know what happens with him. I just wouldn't be surprised if he was a sub one day. You know, he's just he's a very curious player. But let's see if he can hold his spot. George Stevens came in and debuted, covering Stengel, who was also out. Don't know a lot about this guy. The Cats picked him up, I think, the year before last. He spent last year in the VFL. Got the call up and played on the ball. Had 21 touches, kicked a goal. It's as handy a debut as you're likely to see. I don't really know what it means for him. Does he keep his spot? Do they keep him in there? I mean, we've seen Geelong have these young guys come in and you think, in a keeper perspective, I'll jump on him. Mitch Nevitt springs to mind. But then they're back out of the side and, yeah, so a bit hard to tell, but a very nice first up score from him, that's for sure. Jack Martin was, he was my hero on the weekend. I've got him in Dream Team, and he was my cover for Bailey Smith in a very important head-to-head, and he put up a 107. So I'm a big fan of his work at the moment. He played half-back, had a really big second half, so I'm sure he just joined in the party as Geelong really got on top. But a 107, pretty awesome for those who jumped on him a few weeks ago. Saturday night we had Brisbane take on Port Adelaide, and for Port, Jason Horne-Francis is just out of form, and he's a bit sore, clearly, from that shoulder issue a few weeks ago. But what was pleasing was that he had much more of a midfield role this week, and he had a shocking first quarter, but he worked his way into it and scored 85. So I think pretty good signs for him. You'd think if that shoulder was still giving him grief, they'd just give him some time off. You know, it doesn't look likely at this stage that Port Adelaide are in the finals hunt. I mean, it's not over yet for them, but yeah, an interesting watch, that one. Travis Boak put up a nice 94 with a solid 27 touches, playing half forward, and he just still has it, doesn't he? He knows how to find the ball. He's always been very good at that. And as long as he's playing and not in a sub-vest, he has the potential to score for you. It's great to see Jack Lukosius back as well. So he came across from the Suns. I think he played a little bit of round one. Oh, yeah, he went off straight away. I think he scored 0 in round one and he's been out ever since. He came back. I thought he'd struggle a bit early in his return, but this looked like a good outing. Kicked 3 goals, scored 80 in, an away game against the Lions. They got some pretty handy defenders, Brisbane, and I think this is a really good sign for him. A lot of people probably jumped off him thinking at Port Adelaide he's going to play forward. He's probably lost all fantasy appeal. I actually don't agree with that. I think he can be a pretty handy scorer, someone that gets up the ground and connects the play and kicks goals. Nothing really stood out for the Lions. So I'll move on to St Kilda Hawthorn, the other Saturday night game. And it did deliver us the Finders Keepers Player of the Week. Not for the first time, I'm pretty sure, but Nasiah Wanganeen-Millerer. Scored 145 thanks to 33 kicks, 10 handballs, 6 marks, and kicked 3 behinds. Imagine he kicked 3 goals as well. What a game, what a season. And he's really becoming, I reckon, one of the absolute number 1 players in a keeper league. The question I have, though, and one thing I just keep wondering every week, is why don't teams ever try and tag him? I mean, he's not just getting the ball anymore. He's dominating and using it. I've been quite surprised I haven't seen a game. And look, maybe sides have tried. Maybe he's just too good. But surely he needs an absolute clamp put on him. Anyway, love what he's doing. Owners would be absolutely loving life. Max Hall, he put up 88 last week, which caught my attention. And then he's gone and put up a 124 against the Hawks. So where did that come from? I was not expecting that. 27 touches, 3 goals. Yeah, I didn't watch the game. I'd like to see some highlights of what this guy did, because that's some huge numbers there for a first-year player. Very, very much interested in him now after the last couple of weeks, even though I was already pretty hot on him earlier in the year. But he's just someone now that clearly can put the points on the field already. Look, this was a massive scoring game for the Saints. They lost the game. Hawks, held them off, but St Kilda's fantasy numbers were off the charts. I mean, the two I've mentioned, Marshall went 140 in the ruck. Jack Steele, 130. I think that was on the back of like 15 tackles. And Jack McRae hit a 123. Another high tackling game. So from what I've read about this game, I think it was a pretty high stoppage game. A lot of tackles. So lots of points to be had. But not for Hawthorn. They had big Lloyd Meek with a 138, which is a career high. And he really took advantage of it being a high stoppage game. I think he had nearly 60 hit-outs. He just continues to build, doesn't he? He had that breakout last season. He's gone to another level this year, and he's really establishing himself as one of the best fantasy rucks. Just got to work on those basement scores, because he can occasionally still drop a 60. The Hawks midfield really struggled on the numbers, and the fantasy scores tell that tale. Warple came back from his injury, could only score 41. Cam McKenzie, 41. Josh Ward, 71, which isn't terrible. Just very low numbers. And James Sicily returned from his injury spell with a 63. An okay return. Played defence on Mitch Owens, kept him quiet. And yeah, you take that. See if he can build on it. Sydney Freo on Sunday was the only game where the lower ranked side beat the higher ranked side, with Sydney just holding off Freo, and it was a bit of a classic in the end. Very, very tight finish. Some pretty interesting roles in this game. Braden Campbell, he's had a bit of a forward role this year, and last week I think he might have done a bit of a clamp, a bit of a run with role on Bailey Dale maybe. Anyway, he did this week on Jordan Clark, who was coming off a huge game last week. Best on ground, probably. And yeah, Campbell scored 71 points himself and completely blanketed Clark. Kept him to just 13 touches. And, it's really interesting for Campbell. I think it's been hard for him to establish a consistent role in the Sydney side. When I think, looking from the outside in, it's been kind of hard to understand. He looks like a really good player. Just hasn't been able to find the spot. So maybe this is it for him, just to establish himself for a period and then maybe move into a more natural position for him. But if he's holding players like Clark to 13 touches, that's a super effective role. Matt Roberts, been worried about him for a couple of weeks. Just looks like he's been shifted up to the wing. His scoring's dropped off. Last week was very, very low, and I thought maybe he'd get a spell in the twos. He held on, but he held on with the starting vest. Came on at half-time and scored 36 in the second half. Not sure. Remains to be seen if he holds. Errol Goulden, probably not going to need to talk about this guy all that much. I was just so impressed by his second game back last week, and he's done it again this week. 127, backed it up, playing on the wing, and he works inside, lays plenty of tackles. He was tagged in the first half by Wagner. It just didn't really seem to do anything, so they dropped the tag at halftime. Good stuff for Goulden. For Freo, Corey Wagner. I talked about him last week, how I still like him because every now and then he gets a tagging role, and it happened this week. I thought he might have gone with a Heaney, but he went with Goulden in the first half and scored plenty, but then he returned to his usual spot in the second half and the scoring dried up. Luke Jackson was the second ruck again this week behind Sean Darcy. Still scored 89, which is fairly good, and kicked a couple of goals. So he's still scoring well. He's in great form. Yes, it would be more ideal if he was the number one ruck in terms of scoring, but I reckon this time forward's going to be pretty handy, well, pretty important for owners in keeper leagues, because if, say, Darcy was out again long term and Jackson was the number one, yeah, his scoring would go through the roof again, but then he's ruck only next year, which is okay, but if he stays at Freo, I feel like there's going to be a lot of movement in the rucks in the off-season. But if it stays as it is, and he loses forward status, and he's sharing ruck with Sean Darcy, it's not ideal. And even though he could pick up the forward status again, but yeah, I think it's okay that he's the second ruck behind Darcy, because he's still scoring well, and hopefully he can keep forward status. The damage might be done though. I haven't checked the numbers on that. He could be a chance of losing it anyway. And he did that thing I find so funny, where he attends the centre bounces and roves to Sean Darcy. That's what a player. Unicorn, as many are calling him. And the last guy for Freo, Caleb Sarong. Talk about an up and down season for owners of this guy. He just continues to show a vulnerability to a hard tag. And James Jordan, we know Jordan, the last couple of years, can be quite a very good tagger. But we've also seen players really get away from him. So to see him do such a convincing job on Sarong this week was a bit of a surprise. He kept Sarong to a 46, but he held him to just 11 touches of the footy. Now, that is Sarong's lowest disposal tally in a game since his fourth career game back in early 2020. Huge. The other Sunday game, Adelaide and Melbourne, as the D's really took it up to the Crows for periods, but Adelaide did just enough to hold them off. And the Crows were back to their low-scoring fantasy ways again, with just the one fantasy ton. And that was Isaac Rankin, who scored a flat ton, 100. And he just continued his lesser midfield role with a best-on-ground performance, kicking 5 goals. And I think I might have complained about him a few weeks ago, but I don't know. If he's kicking 5 goals, I'm really hoping he scores a lot more than just 100, He was really important for the Crows, kept them in the game. And look, maybe this is a good thing, kind of similar to what I said about Jackson. Maybe this lesser midfield role is just going to be enough to ensure he keeps that forward status for next year, Rankin. But it was all Melbourne in terms of possession. They played a real short chip game, keep possession off the Crows, and it resulted in some pretty high marking numbers. That and the fact that, for the first quarter and a half, most of the game, Crows mids just kept kicking it to these Melbourne interceptors, which helped their mark tally too. Let's look at some of these numbers. Daniel Turner, 16 marks. Stephen May, 12. Lever and Salem, 10 each. So there's a lot of +6s back there for the Ds, which helped those players' scores. And that was how I saw round 17, our first round without buys in... feels like forever. It was good to have 9 games of footy again and full squads to choose from in our sides. Let's have a look at last week's waivers before I tell you my picks for this week. Last week I put up Joe Richards from Port Adelaide. He'd had a couple of really good ones in a row, and I did flag that maybe the Lukosius return could impact him a bit. He scored 64, and with Lukosius in, you'd have to think it impacted a bit, but I still really like him. I still really like his role, and a 64 against the Lions in Brisbane is still a good score, decent effort. So I'd certainly be holding him if I grabbed him. Lockie Bramble, couldn't ignore him after 2 really good ones in a row. He put up a 73. A lower score this week, but he did still take most kick-ins. Albeit that's probably with Bailey Dale shifted forward. But again, if you grab Bramble, I think he's still he's still worth having. He's capable of some really nice scores, especially when the Dogs, possess the footy a lot back there. Braden Fiorini, he put up another 100 on the weekend, and it was more of the same, playing wing, but just little spurts on the ball. And I think you'd be pretty happy with that. That's 3 or 4 good ones in a row from him. And I think crucially, the last 3 weeks, he's seen centre bounces. Not a heap, but a bit. And I think if he keeps working towards that, and that increases, we know what Fiorini can do in the fantasy world. Aaron Norton was the other one, put up. And it was a bit of an easy one. I mean, he came off a 120 the week before. But I just sort of thought maybe that was the confidence he needed. And obviously, he playing North, you thought there was a chance he'd get involved. And he did put up another ton, kicked 5. And I just thought he stood up really well when Sam Darcy was pretty well held early in that game. And that's really what the Dogs need. If one is being held, need the other firing. The last one was Clay Hall for West Coast. He scored 70, but it just looked like he was moved down a bit in the centre bounce rotation, which I must say did surprise me. I mean, I know that Eagles are a young side, they're going to mix things up a bit, but I don't know, I really liked him at the centre bounces the few weeks before that. Anyway, scored a 70. I still think he's a good player, and as long as he holds his spot, which I think he should in the short term, I think he's a good player to have. So they were last week's 5. What about this week? Well, I'm just going to run with the 4 for this list. It's going to be a top 4. And the reason is, and I touched on this last week, it's getting harder and harder to pick these guys because, when you grab a free agent now or put a waiver pick in, there's so much to weigh up. Is he going to help me now win a premiership in the next 8 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever it is? And then the other question is, am I going to keep him? Is he going to make my delistings? So because there's a lot of these thoughts, it just makes it harder to just throw darts and go for it, because these list spots are getting more important as we approach the end of the season. But I'm very excited about the segment this week because the geniuses over at Keeper Fantasy have made a change to the ownership number, the percentage number that you see on the app. Now, previously, that ownership number was reflective of all league types. So, single season, keeper, dynasty, and it would give you 1%. But that wasn't a real true indication of ownership, because as we know, there's such a big difference in the way we play a single season versus a keeper. So now, let's just use Jagger Smith as an example. If you look at his ownership in a single season draft league that you're in, it'll show as 3%. Makes sense. He's out for the year. No one's got him except for 3%. But if you flick over to one of your keeper or dynasty leagues, his ownership is 87%. As we know, he's a future star. So now, when I do this segment and I give you the top waiver picks, I can give you their actual keeper dynasty ownership numbers. And I don't know, it's got me really excited. I'm pumped that they've made the change. So let's jump in. I've got 4 names for you. Been waffling for a while here. Let's get into it. Bailey Scott, currently sitting at 48% ownership in keeper and dynasty leagues, which would have really blown me away 12 months ago. He was really building nicely, scoring well. He lost that defender status, but was still a pretty good asset, I thought, playing on a wing. But he lost his spot at North Melbourne this year, and he's been in and out. And I talked about him at the start of the episode. He looked okay in his return. Crucially avoided the vest. I just think he's a guy to grab now. And that 63 he scored could really help, because not many others would necessarily jump on him. Had he come out and hit a 90 plus, well, everyone would be all over him. So if you liked him last year and he's available, I reckon he's worth a crack. Lockie Cowan, who I've talked about a lot on this podcast this year, he sits at 35% ownership, and everything I said about him and have always said about him is I think he can be the guy at Carlton and can be a real fantasy guy for us for years to come. Just needs to keep the role, stay fit. And, Carlton in general needs some real stability. So hopefully they give this kid a chance. Max Hall for the Saints, he'll be popular this week after he went 124 on the weekend. But as it stands, he's only 64% owned, which is probably about right. But that's going to jump right up after the last 2 weeks. I think he's worth a crack. I'm very interested in him myself. Jack Lukosius, surprisingly, sits at 59% ownership. And yeah, I'm pretty bullish on his chances of being a decent scoring forward for us. There's something special about him. He was a high draft pick. And there'd be some smart coaches who grabbed him before he came back. Just, he'd been in the sandful. We'd heard he was going to be close. But now he's dropped an 80. He'll be popular this week. So there's my 4. Looking a little deeper, which I like to do for those leagues that you're not very shallow, quite deep, and there's not much to pick from on the scrap heap. How about these 4 guys? Liam Ryan is, he's an older player, his forward status, and he doesn't score that well. But what he does is he plays in the middle sometimes, and he gets centre bounces most games, and looks pretty good when doing it. At 14% owned, I reckon he's worth a crack in a very deep league, because there'll be a week where he gets that centre time, kicks 3 or 4, and he puts up an 80 plus for you. Lockie Sullivan for Collingwood. He's shown a bit the last couple of weeks. I've really enjoyed watching him. And he was picked up as a mature age guy a couple of years ago. So he's actually like 27 now, which surprised me when I was looking at him. But I tend to watch Collingwood most weeks, as they are often on prime time, and I've just noticed him the last few weeks really starting to step up. And I was surprised, 8% owned in keeper leagues. Worth a crack. Cooper Harvey, the son of Brent Harvey, who came back after a long time out, looked pretty good on Thursday night. He's only owned in 5% of leagues. And then the last one, it's a real dart throw here, but Maurice Rioli Jr. put up probably the best game of his career for the Tigers on the weekend. He's only owned in 2% of leagues. But what I found interesting looking at his numbers, he's had a bit of time as the sub this year. He's played in 2 games where he's had over 70% time on ground. And in those 2 games, he scored 65 and 98. Pretty good. There's a fair few injuries at Richmond at the moment. And maybe after that big game last week, we see more of it. And we see him on the ground for longer. And with forward status, maybe worth a crack. So there's my 4 picks for a deeper league. And that's what I'm running with for this week. No listener questions this week. I didn't put the call out because I wanted to keep this nice and quick. But make sure you send some through this week. Find me on X at FineKeepAFL and send through your Keeper League questions. We're entering a really important part in your list build because, there's decisions to be made that will be based on whether you're on track for finals or not. A lot of leagues will have trade deadlines coming up. And then as the season ends and all the other different fantasy games finish, ours just get beginning because we've got delistings, maybe another trade period. And that's the beauty of keeper and dynasty leagues. It doesn't end when the season ends because we've got next year to think about. So send me your questions if you've got any, if you want some help with some of those big decisions. And as always, send me any trades that have gone down in your leagues. I love seeing what other leagues are up to and what sort of trades are going down. But that'll do for Finders Keepers for this week. As I said at the start of the episode, this was always going to be a short one, hopefully still quite sharp. Thanks for listening. I hope you have a great week leading into round 18. Getting very close to finals now for our fantasy sides. And I'll see you next week. Well, you'll hear me next week with the next episode dropping at the same time next Tuesday. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.